Hi everybody, this is Dan Surface and I'm enjoying this beautiful springtime weather in Indiana. I just can't describe for you. They talk about fall colors, but we've got all these beautiful white trees out and purple trees and just really enjoying this springtime here. I want to share with you today, by the way, I'm in my car. As you can tell, I'm pulled over. I pulled into a church parking lot so I wouldn't have to hit somebody head on trying to talk on this video. But I wanted to share, so if you're coming the other way, you don't have to worry about it. But I wanted to share with you about signature stories. That's what I was thinking about as I was driving down the road, is everybody's signature story. A signature story is that story that you tell at the beginning of a speech or at the end of a speech, which really attracts attention and emotion and really leaves your audience with a real impression, something that they're going to remember out of that speech. And I remember one time I was brand new in the speaking industry, and I was sitting next to Mark Victor Hansen of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. And another guy at our table said to Mark, he said, you know, I just love that story that you have in Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's the Bopsy story. And Mark said, well, good, thank you. And the other speaker said, I've used that so many times in my speeches. And Mark kind of looked at him funny and he said, you know, that really is my signature story. And he said, really, other speakers shouldn't be telling that story. And kind of under my breath, I breathed a sigh of relief that I wasn't the one that said that, because I've used that story several times myself as a new speaker. So that's what we tend to do as new speakers, is take somebody else's story rather than taking the time to develop our own. And so after that day, I went home and I developed my own signature story. And in fact, one time I gave a speech and then I recorded it, and I went to a meeting of the National Speakers Association and I gave everybody a CD of that speech. And there was a guy there that took that speech, and about 2 months later, I was sitting in a room listening to speakers, and all of a sudden I thought, that speech sounds familiar. He took it almost word for word. Every one of my stories, every one of my illustrations, all of it, he had taken and actually had given that speech. And he thought he was doing me a great honor by doing that. And I had to explain to him that, well, no, we don't do that in the National Speakers Association. We learned that we have to give our own stories, not somebody else's stories. And so I developed my signature story, and that's one I've used in just about every speech that I've ever given. And I can tell it to you. I'm running over on this video. I wanted to make it short, and we're already 3 minutes. But if you've got a couple minutes, I'll go ahead and describe my signature story for you. We lived in a small town, and one of my best friends was a police officer. And he had a fellow officer that had been shot in the line of duty during breaking up a burglary. And my friend, the police officer, asked me if I wanted to accompany him to the funeral. And I said, certainly, I'd be honored to do that. And so I went to this funeral, and I didn't know what to expect. But there were hundreds and hundreds of cars. I guess they come from all over the nation for a fallen officer. And the whole parking lot was filled with what we call bubble tops back then, police cars. And we went into this huge high school auditorium, and one by one, all of these police officers in full dress uniform who knew this officer got up and talked about him in front of his wife and his 2 little boys that were sitting in the front row. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. This guy was really loved. But what really got me was the ride to the cemetery, because we were about 6 cars back from the hearse. And we had radio silence. Nobody could talk on the radios. And it was just a deadly, weary, eerie silence. And so on that ride to the cemetery, we passed through the city, and everybody in town pretty well knew this guy. They came out with American flags and stood along the side of the road and waved those. And at every intersection, the firemen were there in full dress uniforms. I didn't even know they had full dress uniforms then. I thought they wore khakis and t-shirts, but they were in full dress uniforms. And as we went into the cemetery, there was a huge American flag draped between 2 ladder trucks, and we went underneath that. And there on the right-hand side, I noticed was this officer's car, and it was all draped in black. And they had his pistol and his rifle laying on the hood, and there standing beside that car was a beautiful black stallion, prettiest horse I'd ever seen, and they had the boots turned backwards in the stirrups, which I believe is since the Civil War has meant a fallen officer. And off in the distance I heard them playing Amazing Grace on the bagpipes. So it really got to you. But off on the side of the road I saw this little boy, and I noticed he was wearing a police hat, an old-time police hat. And as I watched, he saluted every single police car that went by. And as far forward and back as I could see, every single officer saluted him back. It was touching. Later, after a couple weeks had gone by, I ran into this young man's dad. And I said, what was it with Toby? Why was he wearing that police hat and saluting? He said, you know, his grandpa was a police officer. And he said ever since he was a little boy, he's always wanted to be a cop. That's all he talks about. He dresses like a cop. He plays cops and robbers. That's what he wants to do with his life. And boy, I was just touched by that. Well, about 15 years later, I had the opportunity to stand in the Rotunda building at the Indiana State State House, and I watched as Toby became an Indiana State Trooper. And when they pinned that badge on him, I saw something that I think I'll never see again. I've never seen before. And that was raw passion. It was somebody who had a dream and lived that dream and was actually at that very second experiencing that dream. I got goosebumps then and tears in my eyes, and I do it just telling this story because it's so much about passion. I got to warn you, Toby is a cop in northern Indiana, still a state trooper, and boy, if he pulled me over, he'd give you a ticket. He's gung-ho as all get out. And so if you happen to see an officer pull you over and his name is Toby, watch out. I think if he speeded himself, he would give himself a ticket. That's how gung-ho he is. He's a great cop. And I just love being around him, and I love seeing somebody with that kind of passion. And that's basically my signature story. And I'm sorry I spent so long on this video, but I think I wanted to tell you that story. Because my point is simply this: live with passion every day. Tony Robbins says it all the time. Live with passion. And I guess that's my message too, is you need to go out and live with passion every day and give 100% to whatever it is you're trying to do. We'll see you next time. Thanks.